My name is Chris Paton. I'm a clinical researcher here at Oxford University, and my research involves looking at digital health systems in low resource settings. And I work in the Centre for Tropical Medicine and Global Health, and we work around the world, but most of my projects are based in Kenya, although we're also starting projects now in Vietnam as well. So today I'm going to be talking about the life-saving instruction for emergency app that we've been creating, and I'm going to show you a little bit about the process of how we created the app and where we're going with it. So I'll start the presentation. So life-saving instructions for emergencies is aimed at a particular problem in Africa at the moment, where more than 470,000 babies die each year on the day that they're born, and within the first 28 days of life, this figure increases to 1 million deaths every year. And the WHO estimates that about 2/3 of these deaths could be avoided if the healthcare professionals looking after the babies had adequate training and resources. So this project's looking at trying to improve the training of healthcare workers in Africa to address this problem. So how do we currently do training? So my colleagues in Africa have been running a face-to-face training course for over 10 years called ETAP Plus, which stands for Emergency Triage and Treatment Plus Admission Care. And this has been used to train over 5,000 healthcare workers in several countries across Africa and beyond. And they do this training in quite a familiar way to clinicians in high-income countries, where you get together in a small group and you use a plastic mannequin of a patient, in this case a mannequin of a baby, and use real bits of medical equipment like the mask you can see in the photo, and the ambu bag, the bag that you squeeze to give breaths to the baby, and then go through taking it in turns to act out how you would do a resuscitation of the baby. Now you can imagine that this type of training is quite difficult to scale because you need lots of trainers to take the small groups, so you have to be expert in how to both manage the conditions that they're training but also be good at teaching for a group of other clinicians. And it can cost money to bring the clinicians together, so travel and accommodation if it's over more than one day. And the estimated cost of this type of training in Africa is about $50 to $100 per trainee per day. And you can imagine that there's about 2 million healthcare workers across Africa who need access to this training if we're going to save those lives. So the costs add up very quickly. So given this problem and the challenge of training at large scale, we started to brainstorm ideas of how we could use new technology for improving training. And the key idea came from Professor Mike English, who you can see in these photos, he's a paediatrician who's been working out in Africa for the last 20 years. And he noticed that on the ETAP Plus training, people were bringing along reasonably advanced smartphones, and they weren't using them for training, they were using them for WhatsApp and email and messaging colleagues, and he wondered if we could use these smartphones for helping to deliver training at scale. So we convened a group of paediatricians and nurses from Kenya at a co-design workshop based in Oxford, and over 2 days we brainstormed a lot of ideas, created user personas and user story maps to try and work out if we were to create an app to help people with training, what would it look like, and how would it be delivered on a smartphone format. And while we're thinking about these ideas, we also wanted to make sure that we could use the best quality evidence around how people learn and put that evidence-based approach into the app. So I'll just talk a little bit about some of the evidence that goes into the app, and also then a bit more about what the app looks like and how we're going to take it forward. So the first theory that we wanted to put in place is called spaced repetition. And this should be familiar to everybody who's revised for exams or is trying to learn something new. And the idea has been around for over 100 years. Hermann Ebbinghaus was the person who first discovered this kind of feature of how the human brain works. And he coined the term forgetting curve, which is how we forget newly learned information. So you can see from this graph that when you first learn something to a level of 100%, so if you start revising or learning something and you score 100% on a self-test, within a day you might have forgotten 20% of that knowledge. So if you tested yourself again the next day, you would have lost 20%. And if you test yourself again 3 days later, you've probably lost 40%, and this keeps dropping off over time. However, if you relearn what you learned one day after you've first learned it, you can take yourself back up to 100%. And that also slows down your forgetting curve. So then if you relearn again after 3 days this time, you can get back up to 100%. And then if you relearn after 6 days and the amount of time you can leave between revision increases, and eventually you get to the point where your forgetting curve slope is not very steep at all, and you can retain knowledge and only revise every 6 months or a year. So how could we put this into action in a smartphone app? The idea was to use reminders that tell people when they will have forgotten a significant proportion of what they've learned and that they need to relearn it. So if you've scored 100% on an online game on an app, it might send you a reminder the next day to say, oh, you'll have forgotten 20%, so you need to top up, and then the reminders can increase. And we also thought we might be able to base the reminders more on their performance of the game. So we could, if they scored a particular score, we could use that to determine when their next reminder needed to be sent. So that's one thing we wanted to work on. And then the next idea is retrieval practice. So retrieval practice is really this idea that if you're just reading something as your way of learning, you're much less effective for remembering than if you try and retrieve what you've learned. So this is also referred to as a testing effect. So the idea is that really, in order to learn something, it's not about watching a video like this lecture or reading a textbook. It's really about trying to retrieve the information from your brain as opposed to just trying to get it into your brain. So we wanted to, within the app, we wanted people to be constantly testing themselves, so trying to remember the information as they go through it. So we include lots of quizzes, and the whole app is designed to be constantly getting people to retrieve knowledge from their memory, and then over time that strengthens the retrieval strength of the information that they have stored in their memory, and it will come to mind much more quickly when they need it. And finally, the other thing we wanted to use is a more modern theory around expert performance and deliberate practice. So the idea here is that although if you revise information according to your forgetting curves, you can get back up to 100%. If you practice in a deliberate way, as opposed to just rereading the same information, you can increase your knowledge each time you rehearse. And so you're filling in gaps in areas where you're having problems, and you're not necessarily going over stuff that you already know. And this idea is called deliberate practice, and it's used quite a lot in professional sports. And the idea is that you have someone, a coach, who will watch you as you're performing, and then will give you deliberate practice drills to do after the performance to focus on areas where you're not so skilled. It might be that you are not performing well without realizing it. So say you're playing tennis and your problem is your backhand. As you're playing, you might not realize that it's your backhand that is the problem. until your coach tells you that is the area that you should focus on. And the reason why included in the reason why you don't know it's the problem is the fact that it's difficult to correct it if you've learnt to do something in the wrong way. And so you need to have deliberate drills to recorrect what they call mental representations. So your internal mental representation of what you're doing, you might think it's correct, but you need to realign that mental representation to be correct. So we wanted to try and build this into the app so that people could not only just retain the knowledge, but each time they use it, they increase their skills because it's focusing on areas of weakness. And we're doing this with a project with a PhD student called Tim Tutti, who's working on intelligent feedback for people as they go through it, so that different people will have different types of feedback depending on their performance as they go through the app. So these are all the ideas that we wanted to include. So we ended up with the result of our co-design sessions of creating an interactive 3D game. And then working with nurses both in Kenya and in Oxford, we iteratively developed this over time. So we started out with something that tried to meet those educational theories that we're talking about, but also try and produce something that's going to be at the right level for the training that people have and is acceptable in the environment that it's going to be used in. And so to do this, we had to go through lots of cycles of development, working with healthcare workers in Oxford and then going out to various hospitals across Kenya. And the app that we ended up with, this is what it looks like on a smartphone screen, and I'll give you a link so that you can download it and play it. But basically it uses a 3D game engine and puts you into a virtual hospital ward in Kenya, and you have to go around, find the right bits of equipment that you're going to need in an emergency. So it gives you a scenario. For example, on this one it's mother's about to give birth, but you're worried that the baby is not breathing when it's born. So you have to get the right bits of equipment together, and it will test you on whether you know which bits of equipment you need. And then it will test you on which steps you should go through to resuscitate the baby, and keep asking you questions as you go. So this is showing how you should choose which bit of equipment you need next. And it's saying you need to wrap the baby up in a clean towel. And it gives you kind of instructions to play that through in the game. And then this is choosing the baby's head position. So if the baby's head isn't in the right position, if you try and do resuscitation, it might not be effective. And also it goes through things like how to choose the right size mask for the baby's head, and then how to conduct the actual resuscitation. And then at the end it gives you a score, and you can then submit that score for professional development certification. So as well as the smartphone game, we also developed a virtual reality version. And the reason we could do this was because we were using modern game engines that allow you to publish your game to multiple different platforms. And this one, we used all the 3D models and assets that we built for the mobile version and put them into a virtual reality engine that enables you to put on a headset, hand controllers, and will track you as you move around the room, and then you can do the various interactions
the correct size, right?
that you need to do in order to resuscitate a baby. So this is a similar thing of choosing the right size mask, but this time you can walk over and pick it up and then put it on the baby's head and perform the resuscitation. And in this, the questions come up in a slightly different way. You've got an avatar that you're talking to, and with the VR system, this avatar asking you questions could actually be another real person with a VR headset, and they can be in a different location, so you can kind of communicate over the internet, a bit like using Skype or something like that. And then you can also have other people learning within the virtual reality environment. So you can have additional, you might have 2 or 3 students all learning together, and with the resuscitation you might have different people doing different things. Like, so one person might be doing ventilation, and one person might be doing chest compressions, another person might be making sure the mother is okay, and another person might be trying to get bits of equipment or going for help. So you can use it for team training as well as individual training. But here on this version that I've just shown, it's a recording of a tutorial that's interactive, so people can just put on the headset and go through the whole scenario on their own. So I'll just talk a bit about, so that's what we've developed, and I'll just talk about where we're going now with it. So this is quite a new type of program for doing training. There's not really much like it at the moment. So we've been quite successful in winning funding and awards, and we won the VR for Impact Award at the World Economic Forum in 2018, and that gave us some more funding to carry on the development. And we're now at the stage of rolling out. We've got partnerships with the Kenya Paediatric Association for giving continuing professional development accreditation. So if you score 100% in the app, the Professional Association for Paediatric Doctors will give them a certificate which counts towards their annual appraisals and annual training. And we're also talking with the Nursing Council in Kenya to do the same for 30,000 nurses in Kenya. And we're now working with a number of organisations to try and get that scale-up process. But to date, we've received funding for quite a few different organisations. Our initial funding was from Saving Lives at Birth, which was a competition from the US government and the UK government and a number of other governments, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We've also had funding from the Wellcome Trust and, as I said, from HTC, who developed the Vive VR headset, and we're currently funded from the Global Challenges Research Fund. So that's all I wanted to say, really. So thanks very much for listening. If you want to follow the Life Project, you can follow it on Twitter at OxLife Project. If you go to Twitter and type in OxLife Project. Also email me if you want to have any questions about it. And you can also go to our website, oxlifeproject.org, and I'll just show you what that looks like. So if you go to oxlifeproject.org, you can read about the history of how we've developed it and our team. And you can also click through to download the app for free on Google Play. So if you click that, it will take you through to the Google Play Store page. And if you've got an Android phone, you can download and install it. Okay, so that's what I want to say. So thanks very much for listening, and be sure to send me any questions and have a play with the app and see what you think. Thanks very much. Goodbye.